Welcome to the Healing Broken Families podcast. I'm Barbara Pointe, your host, and each week I am honored to host healing conversations around divorce, parental alienation, high conflict personalities, and really it comes down to healing. So I'm excited today to be in conversation with a personal transformation coach. His name is Adam Hart, and he is the co-founder of Clear Impact. Clear Impact is a self-care community with a beautiful vision to revolutionize how we optimize human health. Adam is also, I'm very excited, a best-selling author, a certified psychological health and safety advisor, and he holds a BA in sociology, but he's also self-described as a biohacker, energy expert, and a former couch potato. Hi, Adam. How are you?
Okay, thanks for having me, Barbara. Appreciate it.
Yes, I'm really honored to be in conversation with you today. I know you have a lot of wisdom and guidance for our audience. And I noticed on your website you have a Unleash Your Energy roadmap. What's that?
Yeah, so this is a six-step process that I share with all of my clients and anybody that I get a chance to be in communication around optimizing our daily fulfillment and daily connection to optimal health. And it's just a really clean and easy way to know what those steps are to implement. Because I think as we have this conversation, people are going to hear some things that might be new for them. And so if it resonates for them, then they know that this is something they can download to recap and also put into some action, some easy steps.
Okay, that's great. I look forward to touching on that again in our conversation. I mean, we all want to be a better version of ourselves. And I personally feel that we're all under a lot of stress. Generally, the collective mind, body, and soul is under a lot of stress and anxiety. I feel it. And so how I invite you to talk to us about that. How can we be well?
It's a tricky one these days for sure. I mean, I know it from my own personal experience of, having occupational burnout at a young age. I was in my 20s when I was suffering with depression and anxiety, was diagnosed ADHD, and was 50 pounds heavier than I am now, and just trying to really figure it out. Like, how do I get my health back on track? And nothing I was turning to was really providing the right solutions. I tried all the different diets and the different fitness programs, and was doing the meditations as much as I possibly could, and the yoga practices, and maybe some medication at times for sure. And again, nothing was getting me back in touch with this feeling of being fulfilled and excited about how my life was unfolding. And I got very lucky. I found a sport that changed my life and gave me perspective on the power of my own mind and also how that relates to my body. And the sport was rock climbing. And as I got into rock climbing, it was this experience with feeling presence that I had never felt before. And as I pursued climbing as a occupation, because at the time, again, I was suffering with so much negative self-talk and worthiness, lack of worthiness and self-doubt, and nothing was really flowing in a harmonious way. As I started to climb more and became really focused on that as a way to live, because it was what gave me peace, I did start to realize that there was something about the climbing activity itself that was transforming my health. And it was allowing me to start to feel more connected to the internal desire to be happier and take better care of myself. And as I dove into a deeper understanding of what that was, I realized that there was a balance hormonally that was happening in terms of my nervous system energy that all of a sudden allowed me to transform my health but in a way where it made it easy to realize, wow, this is something that other people I think would want to know about and possibly want to implement themselves. And so 15 years ago, I created a coaching company based off of what I was discovering in terms of rock climbing and my nervous system energy, and realized that there was something really significant that others wanted to tap into as well. And so I've been teaching the methodology behind this for 15 years now. And at the core of it is really just a deepening to a connection in our own relationship between how our mind functions and how our body interprets what the mind is up to, in a way where we can start to have more peace and calm around it versus the common experience, which I think a lot of us are going through, which is this busy mind or very revved up mind that's constantly trying to fix things and creates agitation, creates anxiety. And it's really hard to live a fulfilled life in that mindset.
Yeah, you're describing overthinking, right, Adam?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, on average, we have 70,000 thoughts a day. And unless we can become a observer of some of those and recognize that the brain really likes to feed off of the stress response, the adrenaline of our fight or flight, we tend to just start to identify ourselves as a lot of these thoughts and live our lives through them, but not really creating presence in how we get to live unless we cultivate a relationship with how to slow down that thought process so we have a different choice.
So much to really unpack there and everything you just shared, because I heard you say that in mountain rock
Yeah, rock
climbing,
climbing. Yeah,
it brought you into presence. And everything in society is taking us or trying to take us out of our presence or our present moment.
Mhm.
Um, and I always usually have guests on that help me. And I'm a very much have a monkey mind, and I'm an overthinker. And it's
Mhm.
almost like a form of suffering in a way.
It is. Yeah, it is. We're not taught this in terms of how we're experiencing our lives. And it starts from a very young age. We start to have these stressful experiences as children. And I know for myself, being bullied as a child and, you know, getting told certain things by my dad as a child became fuel for my mind to feed off of the stress of that. And my mind would loop these pattern ways of thinking about myself because of those stressful experiences. But I didn't know that it was my mind just wanting to feed off of my reaction to them. So like we would label it maybe a traumatic experience as a child or whatever label we want to put on it. But in the end, it's like the brain just learns, like algorithms in a computer, where it can get the stress response. And if we're young and we don't know how to nourish our mind in a way where it doesn't lock into self-identification around these experiences, it becomes who we are. And for me, it was a lot of self-doubt, lack of worthiness, frustration, guilt, that I started to get stuck in these looping patterns of thinking. And it wasn't until I understood how to nourish my mind through my nervous system that I realized that it was never me. It was just the way my mind was functioning was denying me access to being okay with who I am and how I could be in this moment. And the more I nourished my nervous system, the more my brain was able to feel safe and feel loved and let go of the use of those thoughts. And what it does is it creates this presence for something new to be there. And most of us don't realize that we're locked in some of our childhood ways of thinking based off of our stress response. And then we have our adult stressors on top of it, our health and our relationships, our finances, our career. And the brain continues to learn from the stressors how to lock us into more ways to think about those to keep us in that trigger state. And so there's no real living in all that. We're just
Yeah.
kind of continually stuck in that thinking mind.
Yes. It's been described as like a limbic loop that, and I think that we are hearing more generally about nervous system regulation.
Hmm.
And I like the way you described it as nourishing our mind,
Hmm.
but still at the same time, I feel like people might feel like the nervous system, yeah, I know what that is, and it's kind of out there. Like, how can how can we break it down a little bit more? Maybe like, so we nourish our minds, we regulate our nervous system to break those early childhood patterns where you say our brain is feeding off our triggers or a stress response.
Well, the beautiful organ that it is still a survival organ, and so it learns pretty quick that the main source of energy for survival is your adrenaline. So the hormone that gets produced from our fight or flight stress response is its number one source of energy, known as a surge of energy. And so if we don't know that about our own mind and recognize the moments that we're feeling charged up or stressed or anxious, then we're not really going to have an opportunity to teach the brain to not use our fight or flight as its main source of energy. And so that happens from that very young age. And then as we get older, we just get stuck in these patterns of trying to fix things. And yet that's just creating more opportunity for the brain to use this energy of fixing as a way to create stress. So examples around wellness are another fitness program or another diet. I mean, every diet I've ever been on when I was overweight left me feeling so frustrated and so guilty and so stressed. And same with all the fitness programs. And so there's another way to approach our health and wellness that comes from getting out of our heads and getting into our hearts, getting into our body. And that's where the nervous system is the portal to that experience. And so what we're talking about here is, as humans, learning to cultivate a relationship with our rest and digest state, our parasympathetic state, is something that most of us don't even realize we can cultivate that. We know that we live quite anxious. We know that we have these relationships in our lives that often, another example of a stress response is feeling resentful towards somebody in your life, like a partner. That's a huge pattern that I know a lot of folks and I have had in the past, which is, lack of nourishing communication in marriages has a lot to do with the brain's use of a stress response to our partner that creates thoughts of resentment. And next thing you know, you're in this looping pattern of thinking that denies you the ability to be at peace. And so there is a way to cultivate a relationship with the parasympathetic, but it does require some really key steps, which is this idea of the 6 steps I talked about around the Unleash Your Energy roadmap. Getting in touch with our patterns and how we recognize in our lives that if you pull yourself back for a moment and you look at, what are your relationships like? What's your health like? What is your career like? What are your finances like? You're going to get a sense pretty quick of how all those are doing and how they're feeling. And they're all a product of how your mind is functioning. And so if you start to take stock on noticing your patterns of where you're being disrupted and where you're not quite satisfied, well, then you can start to train your mind to let go of the dissatisfaction of those or the need to try and fix those in a way where you can begin to reset your nervous system around those, teach your brain to let go of the desire to trigger those. And that opens up this doorway for you to start to explore a different way to feel into those, a different way to experience your marriage, a different way to experience your relationship with your kids, a different way, a more nourishing way to experience a possible passionate career that makes you feel fulfilled. But those are hard to experience when we're locked in this thinking mind that just doesn't stop keeping us one step ahead all the time.
Absolutely. And you've also asked us to recognize our own patterns that are on repeat. So is it about stepping back to actually be able to become the observer?
Yeah. And so the initial process for when I put a client through this process is to really take stock of those areas and start to be very mindful of where you're being triggered. But then it's being able to, in those moments of life that's the moment that you can train your nervous system back into the parasympathetic state. So how do you reset your own nervous system in the moments? This is what rock climbing taught me. Rock climbing is a real fight or flight experience. If you don't reset your stress response, you could die.
Right.
Most of our lives are lived in fight or flight, but they're not real. It's not a real fight or flight. So nobody really spends time training themselves to not have that happen because we're not really in danger.
Adam, I feel like jumping in because we're not really in danger. We're living in this anxious state, fight or flight, not making friends with our parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also exhausting. Adrenaline burnout. We're so tired.
It's the symptoms, right? I mean, the body will always, and the mind will communicate back based off of the symptoms. The fight or flight state is a highly inflammatory state. It's the number one thing that stress is responsible for is inflammation. It's also why it's the number one cause of almost all of our ailments and disease. Right? And it's a direct relation to immune dysfunction. The strength of our immune system comes mainly from our gut health, our colon, our large intestines. So if we learn to cultivate a deeper relationship with the parasympathetic rest and digest state, the first things you notice is a decrease in inflammation, a balance in your hormones, and gut health. All comes from holding space for your nervous system to be at peace. How do you do that? There's only one way to do that, and that's to train yourself into that state. In the moments of life your brain is trying to cause trouble by one of those 70,000 thoughts a day, and you being able to not react to them, to notice and go, oh, okay, wow, my brain is telling me that, for example, like I have one of my clients who's telling me about how he's upset with his partner because he comes downstairs in the morning and the kitchen's a mess, and there's these looping pattern thoughts of, well, nobody cares about me, and I do so much for this household, and now all of a sudden, there's still a mess every morning when I come downstairs. And okay, well, you can choose to identify with those thoughts and react to those, or you can reset it in this moment. And the resetting is a breath practice that helps to tone your vagus nerve. It helps to tone the way that your heart communicates with your brain, so that in that same moment, you can tell your brain that it's safe, that it's loved, that it can let go of the use of that thought so that you're not triggered by it and you can be at peace. That changes everything.
Yeah.
And the more we do this, it's like training any muscle in the gym, but now you're just training your vagus nerve to be in coherence, to be in this beautiful channel of communication between your heart and your brain, where your brain isn't constantly driving you into those stress response, but you're teaching it to feel safe so that you can be more fulfilled and at peace in this moment, presence. So the breath practice, it's a breath practice I call heart flow. It's a 33-second nervous system resetting breath practice.
Okay, I'm so curious.
Now, the key with this, and this is based off of the science of this, is called heart rate variability, HRV. So this is what I was discovering in rock climbing, and then I started to bring this breath practice into my everyday life and realized, wow, this ability to reset my own stress response when I'm anxious in the morning when my kids are really loud, and loud noise was always an anxiety point for me. Well, I can reset it in that moment. Or when I'm at the grocery store and there's a big lineup and I'm getting frustrated that I got to wait in line, I could reset it right then and there and be at peace. The key to this breath practice is the rhythm. Keeping the rhythm the same for all 3 breaths. And the 3 breaths, essentially what you're doing is we're doing 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out. 4 in, 7 out, 4 in, 7 out. Nice and clean rhythm. And what that does is it cleans the vagus nerve in a way where it tells the brain that it's safe and brings presence into your parasympathetic nervous system. And the first thing you notice is a sense of feeling more peace and calm. Now, the only thing that we need to do after at that point is practice, practice, practice. We have to keep doing it multiple times a day so that the brain begins to feel the release, and you then have the ability to notice that more fulfilled, more present experience that comes with it, which then leads you to being able to do so much more with how you get to live your life.
I like the way this conversation is really providing this powerful reset tool right away for people.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's many folks listening that have had early trauma in their life. And sometimes we do tend to scare the living daylights out of ourselves when we've had early trauma with these looping thoughts. We can scare ourselves as adults. So the invitation for the breath work, it's asking us to reset our nervous system. So let me just see if I'm understanding correctly. You're asking us to reset with this breath work in the moment that we're having a trigger or a trigger or a mental loop.
Yeah. Yeah. In the moments where you realize that your mind, especially, you know, as we enter adulthood, the main thoughts, the underlying energy has a lot to do with self-sabotage. Self-sabotaging thoughts, you know, related to the shame and the guilt from childhood. But the majority of our thoughts when we enter into adulthood have a lot to do with the anxious, future-focused thoughts. You know, the areas of our lives around adulthood, the themes being, again, our relationships, our finances, our career, and our health. And the brain loves to drive thoughts around trying to fix those. But it's in the fixing that it's creating the adrenaline stress response. And so the more that we can self-identify and not react to those thoughts, but just notice them and then do this resetting of your own nervous system in those moments, it starts to train your brain to let go of the use of those thoughts, which then presents the next steps, which is this idea of them being able to move into this space of how you do want things to be. How do I want to feel? How do I want to be in this experience with my relationship with my children, with my partner, with my colleagues at work? Navigating a connection to that is something that most people just never experience because we're so stuck in thoughts of trying to fix that we never actually get in touch with the feelings of how we do want to be. So there's a real magic that happens when we start to train this in and find ourselves with more peace and calm. We then have this whole new room of area to explore to then become more fulfilled in choosing how we want to feel every day and how we want to be. And there's a process to doing that, but we will never get there unless we train our own biology to hold that space for us.
Oh, wow. So 4 breaths in, 7 breaths out.
4 in, 7 out, 4 in, 7 out, 4 in, 7 out. I always count too. Like people ask, well, is it through your nose, out your mouth? You know, it's really, the key is just being able to have a clean rhythm.
I'm overthinking it right now. Like,
Well,
how fast is it? Slow is it?
yeah, and I do have a video training on it that I'm happy also to share. You know, if you want to link it in the show notes, that walks through the steps. You know, the challenging thing is that as you begin to practice this, and you know, again, most of my clients, what they notice after the first week is there's this beautiful sense of more peace and calm. But then the brain starts to understand what you're doing, and it gets upset. It doesn't like the fact that you're not giving it the same amount of energy. So it goes into fight or flight again. But how does it do that? It goes into fight or flight by making the thoughts louder. You know, like all of a sudden it'll rev up the amount of thoughts that it's telling you about a certain thing. You're now shifting your reactivity around, right? So for example, you know, let's say your kids are a trigger, and whenever they fight, you notice that right away you want to control that and you want to stop them, and you don't like that they're fighting, and so you react. Okay, well, now all of a sudden you're starting to reset that, and you're not reacting. You're just pausing. You're coming inward, and you're breathing, and you're feeling into a space of how you would like that to be. And well, your brain isn't going to get the same adrenaline anymore, right? You're not reacting. So the brain recognizes this and says, okay, wait a minute. I want that adrenaline. So I am now going to make you crazier and try to produce thoughts that is going to get you to be reactive to your kids in that moment. Right? It'll rev up the thoughts and it'll make them louder in some capacity. And so the key here is to be very mindful of when that happens, because if you continue to reset your stress response in those moments, the brain will let go of the use of that trigger, because it's a very efficient organ. It doesn't want to use up its own energy. So if it produces a thought that, yeah, you're no longer reacting to, it'll let go of the thought as long as you're consistent with the practice. And the key is then, so what's the result? All of a sudden, if you're not reacting to your kids who are screaming and yelling at each other, and you're now at peace around them, what's the result for you as the individual?
Peaceful, self-regulated experience where we can not react and not have a reaction in our body, because everything happens in the body, right? It's really a somatic response.
It is, and all that remains is presence, right? In that moment, you're completely present. You're not lost in trying to figure it out or fix it or stop it or change it. You're just there. And in that presence, you have your faculties, mentally, physically. You're at your heightened ability to think clean and clear. You have more focus, right? Because, fight or flight shuts the executive function off, the frontal lobe of the brain. So you have a diminished capacity of your own brain power. But all of a sudden now you're at your present, so you have an elevated state of your own mental capacity. Plus, your body is going into a more harmonious state of, in all, like I mentioned, in all areas, the inflammation, the hormonal balance. You really are, in those moments, you're living the best version of yourself possible. And in that, there's so much that we're able to continue to explore into, which is where and how I live my life. It's continuing to explore what presence allows me to experience.
So beautiful.
Right. And it leads to deeper connected relationships, really, at the core. It's the most fulfilling experience that comes from this, at least for me and the work that I do, is a deeper sense of community around me. Regulating myself allows me to co-regulate others. And in the co-regulation of others, you build community around that.
That's extra special too, Adam, because I think, in a way we feel a little bit disconnected in our modern world and lacking a sense of real connected community through our high engagement in social media. And even when we go out into the world, people are, especially in North America, I find too busy to say hello or be genuinely polite in the moment.
It's tricky because most folks are just in a constant state of distraction.
Right.
And they don't know that that's where they live, and they don't know an alternative. And so it's a tricky place, like you were mentioning right at the start of this. Like, we're in an interesting time now where we don't even know that we lack presence, that's even a place that we can cultivate a relationship with living in. We're just in survival mode because of how the brain is operating in modern society. We lack the ability to adapt to the amount of stress we're all under. And
yeah.
we miss out.
Such a question of adapting.
Yeah.
And we've been really called to adapt to so much in the last 4 years, 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, the last 3-4 years has really elevated it. And, the sense of isolation, the sense of loneliness has never been more apparent for folks that, we all know it's a human need to be in community with others. And, again, now more than ever, it's so tricky to find that. And when you do find that, whether it's in your own family or in your workplace or with some friends, most of those folks aren't regulated. They're living their own triggers. And so we really lack this concept of co-regulated community, where we're all recognizing our own response to things and able to reset them where necessary, so that we're all living in kind of a present realm.
Yes.
So it's pretty rare.
Yes, it's very rare. I like these points that you're hitting on with a co-regulated community. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
it is so rare to find.
Well, and it starts with ourselves. The more we regulate ourselves, then it puts us in a position to do that for our immediate, those in proximity to us. So
Absolutely.
that's, most of the time that's our family, and so how do I co-regulate my kids so that when I'm not reacting to them, now their brain isn't using me as a source of a trigger anymore. So I'm creating a co-regulated space for them to feel my energy so that they feel safe and feel loved. This is why, we were talking about the childhood stuff earlier, but this is why so many kids are struggling right now with self-esteem, self-worth issues, is because they don't have main caregivers who know how to regulate themselves to provide a space of co-regulation for them. It's not the words that we say as parents. Those are nice for sure. It's how our nervous system is operating. If we have a peaceful, present nervous system, they feel the love and the safety and the trust from that energy. That's where that feeling comes from. And so holding space for my kids to feel that in my energy is everything. And then how do we extend that outwards so that, they're part of that contribution to their friends and to us as well as, my wife and myself and then our friends. And, it's a tricky place to live right now for sure.
Yes, yes, it is. I think what you're saying is really important for parents raising kids in today's modern day and age. Um, yeah. And I think that also too, it's really important that you touched on safety, because it does come down a lot of times to just feeling safety, to be able to embody that feeling, to let our nervous system relax.
Well, as parents, if we're always stuck in that kind of somewhat triggered state without us even realizing it, there's very little space for a vibrational experience of safety.
Right.
It's like, what is the brain up to really in those moments? And it's up to, again, this idea of needing to fix something, always one step ahead, always working on the next project or getting the next thing done. Or, as parents, easy examples are you wake up and the first things you do is you start ticking off the boxes. I got to go make the lunches. I got to go, make sure that they got water bottles, they got their clothes on, depending on the age of your kids. Mine are 8 and 11. So this is still our routine where, it's easy to get lost in your thoughts. I got to get them out the door at this time. And then I got to make sure this is happening at work. And then this is happening and make sure this is there and this is there. So there's no presence in that. And presence again is the vibrational connection to feeling safe and feeling at ease and feeling fulfilled, really. I mean, that's the ultimate goal for me, is to continue to feel aligned to what feels fulfilling. And the more I cultivate a relationship with just being at peace and not letting my fight or flight run how things are operating, things flow in a beautiful way. But as soon as the brain is left to run its own patterns without your involvement, you're going to know that there's a problem, because you're going to have symptoms, right? You're going to have health symptoms mentally and physically, and you're going to have symptoms in your finances. You're going to have symptoms in the passion that you have around your job or career, lack of, and you're going to have symptoms in your marriage because you're going to have communication problems. And that's all coming from your own brain's use of the fight or flight stress response.
That's incredible. This is a very relevant, really important conversation, a really important message, because just making that connection that you just made between our brain and a fulfilling life, regulating our brain and just having a fulfilling life, which maybe we've all forgotten that that's what we really are here on the planet to have is fulfillment, happiness, love, success, and be the best version of ourselves.
I
I
think
think
we
it's
all know that that's what we want. I just think that there's a large part of the narrative, the media, driving of the attention that we haven't been given the right access, the right way inward, and I appreciate that there's so much out there when it comes to our health and wellness that we tend to be focused on, whether again, it's another diet or fitness program or even meditation or counseling, therapy. I'm not knocking any of that.
Yeah, because I agree with you. It goes on and on. It's like the next self-help, the next program, the next diet, for whatever area it is, the next mushroom, the
Right.
next, but so I agree with you. Then you just feel like, oh, you
Right.
know, where is the, where is the peace I'm looking for?
And that's it. And it is inward. It always has been and always will be. But in modern society, there's just so much coming at us that is triggering the stress response that the brain has locked into learning patterns around, that there is no space for us to feel grounded in our life experience. The brain has just taken over. And then you think in terms of our coping habits, there's just so many opportunities to numb ourselves out, to escape our lives. And, that's another mechanism of the brain. Dopamine being, again, a very essential and beautiful neurotransmitter, which is known as the voltage of the brain, just happens to be at the core of all our escaping habits, whether again, it's sugar, social media, shopping, gambling, alcohol. These are all dopamine based energy sources for the brain. So we have those twofold. We have one experience where we're very agitated or anxious about how things are, and we're always kind of one step ahead. And that's the brain feeding off our adrenaline. And then the brain gets you locked into habitual patterns of escape, knowing that it's going to get the dopamine from those. And that's another, for the brain, it's another source of amazing energy. In those two experiences, there's very little presence and very little fulfillment. So it's just recognizing that, yes, can you get locked in your own mind and trying to figure this all out all the time? Yeah, that's where most people live. But if you pull yourself back for a moment and just look at yourself as the biological, beautiful being that you are, there is a way that you can start to approach your own biology and essentially that relationship between your brain and your nervous system that gives you freedom immediately. Right? But it does come from using the right tools in the right order and having a supportive community around you that understands regulation and understands co-regulation.
It's a beautiful, beautiful invitation, Adam. Very,
Everyone's invited.
very, very yeah, yes. All right. So I think that's a lovely place to close. If someone would like to reach out to you to download your wonderful Unleash Your Energy roadmap or to work with you to make
Yeah.
this important transformation, what is the best way that they can reach you?
Yeah, my website, that's the best spot. It's clearimpact.io, clearimpact.io, and everything's right there.
So nice. So, Adam, I want to invite you in the last 2 minutes to share anything that you intuitively feel has been left unsaid or that might be valuable, golden nuggets or
Mm.
inspiration for our audience before we close.
Yeah, I will. I'll add one more in terms of our ability to really feel this internal peace and groundedness. Um, you can always go to nature to find it. So if we're really having a hard time, the 6 steps that we've shared in terms of the Unleash Your Energy roadmap is one thing, but if you really want to feel the impacts of this, go out into nature and you'll feel it immediately. Grounding in it. I do my best to ground as much as I can in nature as a way to stay connected to the feeling of being present. And that's always available for us.
Wow, that I like that so much. You go out to nature, take your shoes off, walk on the grass,
Yeah.
touch the
Put your
trees.
hands I've been putting my hands and my forehead on trees a lot lately. I'll just sit there with my hands and my forehead on a tree, and I'll send love to my brain just to tell my brain, hey, you're safe. You can let go of some of these thoughts. And then you feel it immediately. You feel at peace.
Really?
It's
I'm gonna put my forehead on a tree and tell my brain that. I love that. That is
it's great.
yes.
And my
Yes.
kids do it all the time, which is like, every time I'm out and we have a 1.5-year-old dog and we go for hikes, and, the kids see me do it, and right away they come right up to the tree with me. And it's such a beautiful thing to contribute to your loved ones.
That's a great tip too for parents to do that with their kids, because kids are also dealing with everything that we're dealing with as adults
That's
when they
good.
go off to school. So
Yeah.
anyway, Adam, thank you so much. It has been such a really relaxing pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in to the Healing Broken Families podcast. I invite you to reach out to Adam, download his free resource, order his book, just connect and say hello. And if you appreciated this episode, please like, subscribe, share, make a comment. I'm always available to chat online. I always respond to comments. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and namaste.
These clouds create the purest rain on earth. It falls on a remote tropical island in search of nature's best filter. Ancient volcanic rock. It's not just water, it's Fiji water.